Start. Okay. 1 second. Ms. Converse. Mr. Rose. We'll go. Can you flank the other side of me?
This side.
The other side, please. And just fill it.
Maybe I should get rid of this.
So, good morning. We are here today because of some events that have taken place over the last few days within our county. As many of you are aware, what the state considers to be an extremely dangerous gang member was given a bond. It is the position of the state that that individual should not have been given a bond based on his history, based on where he was within the process here in Fulton County. And so it is something that has upset my law enforcement partners and also me as the district attorney. The gentleman that we are talking about is Christian Eppinger. Mr. Eppinger has a long history of violence within our community. Back in May of 2016, May 11th of 2016, he was a juvenile. He was 16 years old. But unfortunately, at that time in his life, he chose to commit an armed robbery. The wisdom of the district attorney's office at that time and the Superior Court judge, and because of a very, very kind victim, he was given what I would call a second chance. He was only at that time sentenced to 10 years to serve 4 in custody. He in fact did serve all of those 4 years in custody, but then he was released on probation. When he got on probation, as many of you know from an earlier news story, he decided to commit other acts of violence. Those acts of violence, and let me be clear, he was released on May 10th of 2021 from that 2016 case. When he got out, though, he did not choose to do the right thing. He again became involved in gang activity, and he committed an act of violence on 10/12/21. At least those are allegations and the charges of robbery and aggravated assault. He also, on January the 22nd of 2022, so of this year, completed a felony theft of a car. He then, on February the 7th, when the police were trying to arrest him for the acts that he committed while out on probation, he shot an officer, and he shot him 6 times. That was when they were trying to execute the warrant for the behavior that he did. The mayor and me have been really disgusted with this, as well as the chief of police, because while he was on probation, it is clear that he was not monitored, he did not report, and he was never revoked. And so our local law enforcement went to arrest him for that other crime that he committed. And that crime, as I said, was a robbery. That was on February the 7th, 2022, where he shot one of Atlanta's finest, an officer, and he shot him 6 times. He really attempted to assassinate him. Just by the grace of God, this officer lived. He also shot at another officer. And so this is why we are so offended that this could go on. He was brought before a Fulton County Superior Court judge, the Honorable Judge Schwall. Judge Schwall actually heard the revocation. He found that there were enough facts to revoke Mr. Eppinger's probation, and in fact had already done so. However, he set the sentencing date of that revocation off, and that in fact has been set till April the 27th, 2022. So 1 week from today, he was actually going to sentence him on his finding of being revoked. During that time, he is also waiting to be indicted in the other cases. And in fact, it had been 71 days from his arrest until when the hearing is. And a judge here decided to grant him a bond over the opposition of the state. And that is why we are so offended. We do not believe, based on the fact that he had already been revoked on his probation, he had such crimes of violence already against him that was an inappropriate act. I want to be very clear for the public, though. Mr. Eppinger is not getting out of jail. There is a hold on him from the Fulton County Jail as a result of that revocation, so he is not getting out of jail. We quite frankly believe that Judge Schwall, who is the judge hearing the revocation, is likely going to sentence this gentleman between 50 and 60 years in jail, which is the max that he can get because he took that plea under first offender. And it should be known to the public, his 90 days had not run, and so an indictment will be coming within those 90 days. All of those are facts that we are confident about, but we want the Atlanta Police Department and the public to know that we stand with them, that we are against acts of violence, and especially those that choose to be involved in a gang and commit acts of violence. This is not something that the state supports. It's not something we're going to stand for. Once the Deputy District Attorney, Ms. Convery, brought to my attention that at 5 o'clock the evening before that a bond had been set, we immediately went and filed an emergency motion to have that bond reconsidered, and in fact it is on a calendar tomorrow at 5 p.m. And so although he is going to court next week, we want to make sure that this gentleman does not get out of jail. In fact, we want to make sure that in my lifetime he never sees society again. He has chosen to do this with his life, and now is the time for him to be held responsible. I'll let my police chief speak.
Thank you, Madam DA. I want to thank you, the Mayor's Office, Fulton County Sheriff's Office, for being in alignment and having solidarity as it relates to the actions against Officer Rogers. But I want us to be clear that we're not standing here in solidarity just because this was action against a police officer. This was an action against our society as a whole. The officers represent the community. And when you strike out against the Atlanta Police Department or any law enforcement official who is standing in the gap, it's a strike against our whole society. This is a most atrocious act of violence against our people when one strike out at a police officer. What we saw, as the DA stated so clearly, is an attempt to assassinate one of our police officers. We must hold people truly accountable for their actions. Police officers are, and I am in agreement, that officers ought to be held to a higher standard. But what comes with that level of higher standards is the protection of the responsibility that they have to the community. And when one takes action against that trust, then the community must galvanize together to protect those responsibilities. And I think what we are seeing here from the DA's office, from the mayor's office, from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, and all of us that are standing here in solidarity shows that we will not tolerate that in the city, in the city of Atlanta, and in the county of Fulton. It cannot be tolerated. And so we find it quite appalling that the individual will receive this level of bond, but we appreciate the actions taken so swiftly by this DA's office to address the wrongs of this, what we find that happen in this judicial system. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I'm curious, why did the judge do this, knowing that prosecutors opposed it? What would the reasoning have been with 71 days when you have 90 days?
I think that this is just a problem with our process at this point. And I am going to be meeting with our chief judge. One thing that happened in this case is the Superior Court judges have written a standing order which allows judges that are not elected by the people to set bonds. That's issue number one. And the process that I'm discussing is that those defendants come back before the judge approximately every 6 weeks. This defendant would not have been back before a judge for another 6 weeks. I think the judge had some concerns that he would hit his 90 days and then legally he would not have a bond. But that's process over common sense. What should have happened is the case should have been set down for 19 days. If the state had failed to indict him, at that point the judge would have had to given him a bond by law. A bond should not have been set. This gentleman is just simply too dangerous. We are very pleased, though, that the Superior Superior Court bench has given us an opportunity to readdress this issue, and that will happen, as I said, tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. And what I believe will happen next week, Wednesday, is that this gentleman will be sentenced to over 50 years, and that you will also see an indictment for this crime against these officers long before 90 days hits.
Madam DA, we need to refer to the video.
Yes.
Chief Hampton.
We're going to have the police department would like you to see the video of when this officer was shot, and then we will continue with questions, sir.
Chief Hampton will walk us through.
So again, what you'll see is, the subject being followed by Officer Rogers. Again, as Madam DA indicated, that he was, you go ahead, he was wanted. Officers were all hot on his trail. And again, we just want to show the level of violence and the total disregard of life that this individual had on Officer Rogers, as well as Investigator Will Johnson. What you will see is Officer Rogers will get out of a marked patrol car. Right there, trying to take him into custody. There was a struggle, and it was at this time, with total disregard of 6 shots fired into Officer Rogers. And so again, this is why we are displeased with this decision.
This video will be posted on the APD News website.
Yes, sir.
So DA Wilson, just 2 questions. One, just to be clear, you were mentioning in 2016 he had already had that first-time offender deal. So regardless, even though the judge had set bond on some of those charges, he had no chance of getting out. Is that correct?
So I want to make sure that we're clear. On the 2016 case that you're talking about, he has up to 60 years he's facing. He did about 4 years of that time. So that had already been revoked, meaning he violated his probation by committing other crimes. So on that, he is going to be sentenced. This bond was set on the new case. So the case where you just watched the video, as well as I mentioned the theft, that is where a bond was set. He will be back before the Superior Court judge who already revoked him but wanted to make sure that he got his sentencing numbers right on next Wednesday. So he is not getting out.
How do you, I mean, it was just a couple weeks ago, we were all standing over at APD. You guys were talking excited about this new repeat offender program. It seems like you guys all communicated, but it didn't work out with the judge. I mean, how do you feel about this? The fact that you guys did your jobs, it sounds like, in your opinion, that the judge didn't do her job.
Well, what I would say is this. The court has given us an immediate opportunity to address what we believe is a mistake that should not have happened. This defendant will not get out of bond, and we believe tomorrow that any bond that was set will likely be revoked. Obviously, he has an opportunity to be heard at the 90th day if we have failed to indict him on those issues. But you and I know that will be of no consequence, because by then he will have been sentenced on the probation case that he was on, and he will be indicted.
And I don't know if this is a better question for the sheriff or you, but you guys handed this picture out. It appears that this came from the suspect's Instagram. So I would imagine, I just want to get your reaction to what he posted, and then maybe for the sheriff, it appears like if you have your reaction to it.
So at this time, we can't state whether that was done inside the jail or someone is acting on his behalf with his Instagram account. But what it shows you is the flagrant kind of finger in your face to the judicial system, but not just to the judicial system, meaning the judges, the DA's office, the police, really to anyone who wants to live in a civilized society. And I hope that you read that and that you publish that, because he celebrates the fact that he was given a bond, even though he knows he is wanted right now for all of that violence. And not wanted as in the police didn't do their job and he was not caught, but he needs to get to his sentencing and final prosecution. Obviously, him, like anyone else, will have to prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt, but we are confident that we will.
Madam DA, at the meeting a few weeks ago, we were talking about the repeat offender thing. You said, almost as an offhand comment, that a major RICO case was coming out at the end of the month. Is Christian Eppinger's case connected to that RICO case?
I'll ask you to wait. Time will tell.
I ask in part because I'm trying to understand why your office had not indicted Christian Eppinger in the 71 days before now.
We have not indicted him in the 71 days because we're making sure that we collect all the evidence, that things are listened to that need to be looked at, that we're looking into social media, and that when we bring down an indictment, that it'll be an indictment that is complete and holds him and others responsible for all of their actions.
Chief Bryant, how is Officer Rogers?
So in my last communication with him, he was doing quite well. He still suffers from some level of pain that he continues to manage. But his spirit, to be honest with you, you have to see him. You have to talk to him to recognize that for someone to be that have that level of energy and spirit, God was with him that day. But he stays very positive in every communication that I have with him.
So you anticipate that he's going to return to service as a police officer?
That'll be completely up to him and his family. And but we're here for him if that's his choice.
Chief, what are you hearing from officers? Is this impacting their morale, getting this news yesterday?
Absolutely. I mean, immediately when it came out, I started receiving the calls, and we start seeing what was on social media as well. But again, I think that the bigger part is to see how quickly this administration, the DA's administration, and Atlanta Police Department galvanized together to show our displeasure as relates to that finding.
Is there any way, DA, is there any way you can reiterate, because we weren't in the courtroom, I mean, what was the judge's explanation? I mean, because I think to the layman person, you look at this and you go, what is she thinking? I'm not sitting here to gang up on the judge, but there had to have been some reasoning. I'm sure your prosecutor gave a compelling argument. So what was the reasoning behind this?
I think the reasoning is this, that our judges are under pressure to make sure that they do not have people in jail after 90 days. And us as prosecutors that have to follow the law, we completely respect and understand that if we do not indict a case by the 91st day, by law, they will be guaranteed a bond. With the backlog of cases we have, I'm sure she was worried about bringing this defendant back. But you have to look at each case individually. You have to look at each defendant individually. This gentleman has chosen just a life of violence, and he's chosen to participate in street gang activity. He continues that street gang activity now. We have information of that. Even in the jail, he is attempting to do acts that further a gang. He has got to be removed permanently from society. And so in this case, it's not a decision that we agree with. We certainly do not want to disparage this individual judge. I do have a problem, and I want to be real clear. I have a problem with the process. I have a problem with the fact that judges that are not elected, that are not Superior Court judges, would even have the authority right now to hear cases that involve gangs, because gangs are plaguing our society. So we have to make sure that those judges get before a Superior Court judge. And I'm going to be having a conversation with my chief judge this week to make sure that we get this order amended where only the judges elected by the people hear cases as serious as this.
DA, for that 2016 case, you talked about revoking that first-time offender status and then resentencing him. What's the status with that?
That is the case that will come up next Wednesday. That's the case that I'm telling you I believe he's going to be sentenced somewhere between 50 and 60 years.
And is that judge a family court judge?
I'm sorry?
Is she a family judge, a family court attorney? I forget what you call it.
This particular judge is a sitting magistrate, and so the magistrates are also able to hear some matters of the Superior Court bench. So she was not actually working with her magistrate hat on, if that makes sense. She was working as a Superior Court judge by designation of the Superior Court bench when making this decision. The position that I take is elected Superior Court judges should probably hear cases that involve gun violence with what we're facing right now in society. They are required, under this order to hear murders and rapes. I think the list needs to be much broader and take into account gang cases and certainly cases against my law enforcement community. But quite frankly, I'd be saying the same thing to you if a citizen that was not law enforcement was shot. I don't believe they should be seeing cases where violence was committed via a firearm.
What's the status of the body cam version of the shooting? Is that going to be released?
I'm sorry?
The body cam version of that shooting, is that going to be released?
It will not be released.
Christian Eppinger was identified as a member of the YSL street gang, Young Slime Life. And he's also identified in media reports and elsewhere as a rapper who calls himself Bad Briss. YSL is also the label for a music group that's fronted by the rapper Young Thug, and also includes other fairly prominent rappers in Atlanta, like Gunna and Funk and God knows who else. Many of whom have also had very substantial run-ins with the law, both historically and recently. Do you anticipate indicting Young Thug, Gunna, and other members of YSL?
I anticipate indicting anyone who commits an act of violence within my community. I anticipate doing it within 90 days, and I am not impressed with the fact that you are a rapper. That's not going to keep you from being indicted by this office. And if they've committed acts of violence, and if we have enough evidence to substantiate that, you're going to see indictments.
What connection do you believe there is, like here in Atlanta, between gang violence and the music industry, specifically sort of like trap rap and drill?
So obviously we have lots of people that are out and they're a part of the music industry and they're rappers and they are not doing anything wrong. That is their trade. However, it is an unfortunate reality that we have some people that choose to use their fame to promote gangs. We have some people that are rappers, some of which you have named, that are doing acts of violence. And if they do it within this county, they're going to find themselves indicted and eventually convicted. I believe that my sheriff needs to address.
Michael, I want to address your question specifically, and timing is everything. So at this very moment, there are 5 different agencies to include DeKalb, Cobb County, Fulton County, and a couple other agencies, the state. We're actually conducting a massive shakedown at the jail right now, started earlier this morning. And so we expect to find several things, right? And this is not simply because of the actions of the DA and certainly our police partners. This is simply because it's the right thing to do. And we are running a massive facility, the largest in the Southeast, 3,200 inmates, give or take, on the weekend. And so we've gotten and enjoyed the relationship with the DA as one of the things that we stepped up to do from the beginning. When we knew the jail was overcrowded, when we first took office, was to give access to the DA's investigators, reunite the partnership with the Atlanta Police Department, the investigators, et cetera. So there's a lot of information there that'll be forthcoming. And as you know, we had a deputy that was stabbed last week before. And so those things spawn this next action. So our goal is to have the safest jail in the industry, but quite simply these actions and the partnerships we created, and thank you for your leadership, Madam DA, have really allowed us to be in that space. So we'll know shortly about that.
Yeah, that was kind of my next question. How is your detention officer doing? And then also, are you able to just explain what you mean by a shakedown?
And great question. So first of all, Officer Richardson is doing fantastic, right? I was actually at the facility when the attack occurred. We had an opportunity, and certainly want to thank publicly the Atlanta Police Department who really made sure the streets were shut down to get him to the hospital to seek and have the level of care he needed. So he's doing fine. He's excited about coming back, but again, as you can imagine, being attacked in a space that is supposedly secure, right? With 350 people on the floor, our goal is to create an environment that is more safe. So shakedown specifically is we have a couple hundred people right now going through every single cell, every single piece of materials that we have, be it bedding, be it clothing, whatever that looks like, to ensure that we've captured shanks, we've captured or homemade knives, cell phones, whatever that looks like, right? And so we've been very, very focused on making sure we create a safe environment. So,
Sure.
all right.
Have there been other incidents of violence within the jail, say over the last 3 months or so? And if there have, is there any connection between that violence and the gang activity that we're describing, like, broadly?
And so the best part of that is our relationship with the DA and the investigators, and what I don't understand, and it's public information, that we record everything that happens in the facility, period, both audio and visually. So to that extent, we're combing through to make those determinations, but we're going to make sure that, as it's been said, in our previous to us taking office, at one point the Fulton County Sheriff's Office was the largest incubator for crime in the city. And so we're going to utilize the technology that we have at our fingertips to make sure we make that a non-issue.
The reason I ask is because another big name rapper, YFN Lucci, was attacked in jail more or less at the same time that Christopher Eppinger was getting arrested. Lucci claims that there's a bounty on his head. And I'm wondering if the tit for tat that I think is occurring on the street between gangs is playing out in the jail.
Well, let me calm your suspicions, right? He is by himself. He is in no harm, right? As a matter of fact, when he comes out, there has to be supervisory personnel present, right? So we take that, and it's not just because it's him. Those individuals that are high risk, we treat the same way. And so our goal is to make sure that everyone's loved ones that are incarcerated in Fulton County, whether they're sleeping on the floor or not, are absolutely safe as possible.
Thanks, guys. About the process. I understand there's something called an ORCA system. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
For 90-day plus cases and to clear backlogs, that sort of thing, and that perhaps there's a consultant who may be running that. I don't think this case with Effinger went that far, right? Because it hadn't hit the 90 days.
It was actually on the ORCA calendar.
How does that work, and who runs that, and who is this consultant?
So ORCA is just a fund that was created when the federal government gave money to the judicial system or to Fulton County government in general. And what they are doing is running additional calendars. So now the district attorney's office is answering to calendars in the evening and other times to try to get us through the backlog.
And so he was on that? Why was he on that at 71 days?
Well, that's what I thought was interesting in your fact pattern. We see cases on that calendar which have not, in fact, hit the 90-day calendar. All right, well, thank you all for coming.